basically in
Good evening,
100%
Earth. This is
agreement,
Adam Sturch
except I
podcasting
go
from the Mushroom
further.
Mansion, Taos,
I
Mexico,
say
working on
the
an oil
thing,
painting
and he is
sundial.
crafty
Get
enough
the
in his
light to adjust
Jesuitical
there.
way to stay away from
Alright,
these
last
things,
time
so
I
likely to
continued with the
expose you
cobble
to
coloration. For the moment, I'm going to
But what
switch
he's
up
saying
to
is the
the upper
phenomenon
portion
of
and make
man
this leaf light patterning
is
more dense
that
with a
we
more
are now generating what he
rich
calls
variety
the
of blues.
noosphere.
I
And the
started with a
noosphere
Prussian blue
is the
titanium white mixture
atmosphere of
for the
technical
moment.
accretions and electronic information transfer and electromagnetic fields, VHF, UHF, so forth and so on, and that this is part of evolution. His great insight was to see geology, biology, and sociology as a continuous spectrum, and you know, McLuhan talked a lot about Teilhard de Chardin. With McLuhan, you never knew whether he was being entirely serious or just going for the good line. But he maintained, he said that the age of the Holy Ghost, which was to occur immediately before the end of the world, that the age of the Holy Ghost, we had Edison to thank for it. And that the spread of electricity around the world was the direct descent of the Holy Ghost. And that as cities turned to oceans of electric light, he saw it as an epiphany of the third person of the Trinity. This is an argument for keeping Catholics far from the machinery of power. They're clearly screwballs of some sort. But it seems to me that if you make a religion out of consciousness, which unconsciously, I think we in California have done, or that this is what the New Age is about. We worship mind. We worship mind. Well, if you make consciousness your religion, then clearly the body of consciousness is the technical accretion, the superhighways, the computers, the color, the fiber optic networks. All that is how consciousness manifests itself. Consciousness wants, it's as though we're still involved in the alchemical concerns of the 16th century, that consciousness achieves its fullest perfection through the fusion with matter. You know, that the union of spirit and matter, which in materialist scientific terms is crazy talk, doesn't happen. But in the terms of the magical pre-Cartesian attitudes toward matter, this is what they were going for. And in a sense, you know, Marcelian said this. He said, it's ironic that the 20th century, with its scorn for the magical notions of the 16th century, has achieved the full program that those notions set forth. In other words, changing of lead to gold, we do this. It costs a lot of money, but we can do it in our reactors, our cyclotrons. We change lead to gold. We sequence the genome. The secrets of life and longevity are unfolded before us, and then this final thing in the computer. I mean, the computer is the union of spirit and matter, and you know, 5 or 6 years ago, you used to hear a lot of talk about how computers could never do all kinds of things, and they were simply adding machines and this and that. Well, that's a kind of computer, but those voices have grown strangely muted as massive parallel processing and neural nets and stuff like this. So I don't know where all this rests. You know, James Joyce said man will be dirigible, which is like the flying saucer faith. I would like to think that the philosopher's stone is a suitable goal for human evolution, that we are actually downloading ourselves into a solid state realm where all that moves is ideas in the kind of electronic collectivity of mind, and then the earth is left to itself. But how this is to be accomplished, I'm not sure. But on the other hand, it's not up to me. I mean, if you read people like Hans Moravec, his book, what's it called? Mind Children, The Future of Machine and Human Intelligence. I mean, there are ideas in there so bizarre and far out, and yet, being discussed by someone with a tenured position at Carnegie Mellon University, that all that really holds us back as these boundaries dissolve is our imagination. The difference between the psychedelic experience and history is that history is real. And at the end of it, you're going to be able to stay there, wherever there is, if you want, and do those things. And I think it's coming very, very quickly. Even the wildest things that we've talked about here to save certain theoretical constructs, such as time machines, are now being talked about in the popular scientific press. There was an article about time travel 3 issues ago in Scientific American. So does anybody want to say anything? Yeah.
Do you see a distinction between understanding/knowledge and consciousness? Or do you see those as one and the same thing?
Well, this is a hot and complex thing that's being debated right now. The materialists who hold the high ground in neuromolecular physiology, what they like to say, they're very happy with this formulation, they like to say that consciousness is short-term memory plus attention. This is the new buzzword. Short-term memory plus attention. Actually, William James said this first, but it's just been brought forward. And if you think about it, that's a pretty good working model. If you say that consciousness is short-term memory plus attention, then it's probably a characteristic of most animals. And so then you get a seamless web. Where it gets complicated is that what we seem to be able to do is build very, very flexible models of future courses of action. And this may be a relationship to long-term memory. The relationship of higher animals to long-term memory is not clear. In other words, a mountain lion hunting, does she retain a memory of an incident with important learning embedded in it months and months after it occurs? And in what way does she retain it? Does she retain it as a reflex? Or does she actually, as we do, recall? And when we say recall, we mean picture a scene in our minds from the past and run it forward. How, again, well, this leads to something that I wanted to say, that memory, if you wanted to point to an incredible and significant failure, I've been talking about all these far-out things that have been going on, the greatest disappointment in science, I would say, in the last 35 years is the utter failure of science to make any progress on the question of memory. I mean, I've been following it for almost, well, not 35 years, but 30 years, and they're nowhere. They have not gotten beyond the kind of stuff that Carl Pribram was talking about in Languages of the Brain, which was published in 1973, for crying out loud. Walter Freeman's work, creative, brilliant work, no conclusion. The hardcore materialists have gotten nowhere. And this is a central thing for understanding consciousness, because where are the memories? Carl Lashley was the first person to ask this question, and it's never been satisfactorily answered. And, now there are new theories about interference patterns in the brain and this sort of thing. But, when the telephone was new, neurophysiologists like Ramon de Cajal said the brain was like an international telephone network. Now suddenly we have a hot new metaphor, and we apply it to the darkest area of our ignorance, which is the brain. But and then, you have the hardcore mystics who say the effort to understand consciousness is intrinsically doomed to failure, that brain cannot elucidate brain. And there's something to be said for that. Gödel's incommensurability theorem and that whole thing. I don't exactly understand what it means to say explain consciousness. Understand it? I mean, what would that mean? Does that mean we would start with a synaptic event and end with an experience and be able to trace the transition from synaptic event to experience all the way through? I like, and it's a free enough field now, you can say anything you want. I like the idea that the brain is a antenna, not a storage device, and that seeking memory in the brain is like tearing transistor radios apart looking for little men. There aren't little men in there, and so what you have instead is a quantum mechanical antenna. That would make sense, because I really believe nature is a kind of seamless, self-regulating oscillator of some sort. And so it's much more important to be in tune with the larger sets of what's going on than to be isolated from that and somehow inwardly cognizant of what philosophers call an interior dimension of transcendence. I don't believe that. I think, that we are the most existentially isolated of all animal species as a consequence of language. And that part of our difficulty in correctly picturing the mind and its place in nature is the fact that we assume our uniqueness and our isolation and the strength of the ego boundary. But if you saw the brain, that's why, my idea of the regulation of culture through the psychedelic experience is not that there is something magical about the psychedelic experience in and of itself, but that what it is an attunement to natural harmonics on many levels that we could call, I do call it, the Gaian mind. It's a higher intentionality, but it's not mystical mumbo-jumbo, it's biology. That there's level upon level of pheromones, oscillations, chemical oscillators, all kinds of things that regulate biology besides the gross activation of enzyme systems inside the wetware of an organism. And when you're in the jungle like the Amazon, you see that, this is seamless, this is one thing. It's only my style of knowing that tells me this is a palm tree, this is a crocodile, this is a butterfly. But the way it's all working is it's just genes and gene exchange and life and death and procreation and symbiosis and so forth and so on.
That was Rupert Sheldrake stuff too. And I was thinking of idiot savants too, how they, with their minds as an antenna, tapping into this incredible knowledge that there's no way they could ever learn.
Yes, well, I count myself among their number. Without doubt. No, that's the only way, I mean, that is how I explain my career, because it has, fundamentally a mathematical basis that's very solid and beyond reproach by all but the most stalwart, and yet clearly I'm some kind of cannabis-smoking lunatic. So how did that happen? Well, it's just the principle of the idiot savant, I think. And that nature is knowable. If you're God's fool, the secret will be given over to you. I mean, it's everywhere. It's in every drop of water. Everything has it in it. That was the alchemical faith, and it's the fractal faith as well.
I have a question about the
the antenna thing, because I understand it in terms of, picking up certain ideas or whatever, but when we talk about receiving specific memories that you, as a single entity, have experienced. So is you as an entity have experienced this thing and now it's just floating out there in whatever.
You mean, does it actually call you up and say, hey, you? Is it like that?
How is it, what is it that produces that one? I mean, I can imagine receiving certain things that are cultural or, Gaian, whatever, but when you receive, you're talking about your own personal memory of, stubbing your toe 8 years ago. Why is that floating around?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, this is the great problem for all theories of memory. We know that if you live to be 70 years old, that every molecule in your body will be exchanged approximately 10 times. Well, then how is it that a 70-year-old woman can remember what it was like to be taken in the arms of her grandmother and the smell of the perfume that the old lady wore? I mean, that is just an absolute mystery. And if you're a hardcore materialist, and God knows they're around somewhere, probably not here, but if you're a hardcore materialist, then you say, well, something must persist. And if we could figure out the one thing that persists, then we'd have it nailed. Well, it turns out there is something which persists. The neurons do not cycle over. You are born with a certain number of neurons, and you die with a few less, depending on your drug-taking history, and they are never replaced, and they are never cycled out. Well,
All right, so this is going to be a short session for that color. I guess I could mix up another color. I still got 10 minutes. But let me think about that for a second.
The theories
Maybe some
necessary
jade green,
to turn
maybe.
it into the story side.
Okay, what the hell? I'm going to change tone and then go back across it, see if I can get another layer in the next 10 minutes.
The invisible landscape plug to find a theory radical enough to account for that, because you would have to hypothesize molecular storage almost at the speed of a tape recorder of theoretically an entire lifetime. So 70, let's make it 35 years, because presumably you don't retain your dreams very useful. So let's say 30 years of continuous tape recording being downloaded into something under 8 angstroms in diameter, with no degradation of the data stream, and so forth and so on. I mean, it becomes insupportable and fantastic in their minds, but perhaps not. I mean, nature has a peculiar way of using redundancy. Like, once nature finds a way to do something, she will tend to use that technique over and over again in different applications. We see that the problem of storage of information and retrieval of information and non-degradation of that information has all been solved in the functioning of DNA. But the information that is stored in DNA, if you talk to an information theorist, they will say, well, it's not like memory, it's not like people's faces or their addresses and telephone numbers, it's just protein synthesis. It's structures for protein synthesis, and you mustn't be so naive as to confuse this with real information and pat on the head, so forth and so on. But here we have the DNA, the central molecular machinery of life, and for reasons known to nobody, vast sections of it are what are called silent DNA. What does that mean? It means those parts of the DNA don't code for proteins. Well, but maybe they code for something else. Maybe they code for memory. And maybe the so-called random or trash arrangement of nucleotides in those sections of the DNA are, in fact, our memory. I mean, memory is very mysterious, And the mechanism which explains it may involve principles at the edge of or beyond the grasp of current science. I mean, think of it. You know, I have memories going back to 8 months, and many people report memories under 3 years. And often these are movies, you know, the most highly degradable and data-dense form of image storage there is. I mean, that's why it's so maddening to store images, you know, videotape on computers today, because it's so memory intensive, as they say in the biz. And yet this seems to be how we store our memories. Let's see, what else needs to be said? Well, again, this is simply a laundry list of things, cutting-edge concerns and ideas in the realm of what I've left out, and I'll mention it, and then maybe we can knock off, are pop political ideas. I've talked to you guys before about the idea of one woman, one child. I've slightly modified it recently, or made an addendum to it, which is, I think it would be very interesting if every woman had one child. We've talked about that and the social consequences of that. But how interesting it would be then if 75% of those children were female, and that the feminization of society, I think, should not proceed through the feminization of man. It should proceed by dialing down the overall number of men in the society. And I think probably the 50-50 sexual ratio that is actually an artificial ratio maintained by crazed monogamites and their dominator stooges. Not to judge it, of course, but and that usually in large mammalian social animal groups, males are more at a premium, and so that's something I've been following and talking to people. And then lastly, and in a somewhat lighter vein, I want to urge you all to consider the Zippies and their crusade to save the soul of America, which you may not have heard of. Well, that's how it is with crusades. The Zippies are a bunch of English bohemians who are trying to launch a third British cultural wave, following in the model of the Beatles first and Malcolm McLaren and the Sex Pistols second, and now come the Zippies. And they exemplify a certain kind of syncopated house, trance, dance, techno music. And what I like about them is that they operate under the banner of what they call pronoia. And pronoia is the creeping idea that people are plotting behind your back to help you. And I see pronoia as part of the phenomenon of boundary dissolution. You know, things are going to get better and better because everyone, and what a zippy is basically a freak who has their shit together. You know, zippies are freaks, but they don't have large amounts of garbage in their apartments. Freaks who recycle, that's your typical zippy. And so they'll be making their way across country, and if you get a chance to attend any of their raves, you should do it. Raves are very good for the soul. And there's a lot of youth bashing going on in this country. And it's very weird and directed from large glass and aluminum boxes along Madison Avenue in Manhattan. You do not, there's nothing wrong with people under 25. They're fine, thank you. It's the culture that they're inheriting that is so toxic and weird that they don't know what to do with it. Somehow the response of that culture is is to stigmatize them and lay down all kinds of horseshit truths about Generation X and this and that and the other thing. I really think the Zippies are the real youth culture, and it's psychedelic and it's experience-based. That's the other thing, something we preach here over and over again, that the primacy of direct experience is what life is about. Not what Time magazine is telling you, but how you feel in your body right here, right now, and the drugs you take and the sexual acts you participate in and the things you do with your mind and body in real time, and everything else, it is highly abstract and not to be trusted, I think. In New York, I gave a talk for the Zippies trying to formulate what it is, and it's mostly what it isn't.
Alright, so that gives that a little more diversity, variety, and motion, and that's nice. So that's it for the moment. Uh-oh. I still got 3 minutes. Okay, good.
It's about taking
Back up a little bit.
direct
There we go.
experience.
And
If we could feel our circumstance, if we could feel what we're doing to the
is that
earth
going to focus?
and each other,
No.
we wouldn't do it. It's that simple.
There we go.
Because it's too horrible. But you can
Alright.
anesthetize yourself with ideology, with wealth, with
Just want to get a good
distance,
ending frame for the
with religious
final processing.
obsession and so forth and so on. And then, you can't tell shit.
So that's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, Mexico, working on oil painting Sundial. Thank you for watching, and have a good evening, Earth.